Oh, hi, and welcome to Slapshot Smack Talk. Once again, I'm Erik Janssen of Montreal fame, of London fame, living here in the UK. Is it fame or is it infamy? Who knows? But one guy who is famous is joining me here today is a sports columnist, BBC NFL analyst on television. He's not only that, he's written books. Not only that, he also used to be Bill Belichick's lacrosse teammate in college. Is that right, Mike Carlson?
Yeah, it is right, and I've probably milked it for all it's worth, but I'll milk it again. But he was a freshman or I was a senior when he was a freshman. He was the only guy on the team who ever asked me why I was carrying all those sticks to practice every day. And the reality was, I was the starting midfielder, center in the center. I was the fourth defenseman. So if one of our defensemen took a penalty, I would play defense. If one of our midfielders took a penalty, I would play midfield with my defense stick, because I still claim to have invented the long stick midfield based on the Montreal Canadiens killing penalties around that time with three defensemen and one forward, which had never seen anybody else do.
I learned more about lacrosse in the past 2 minutes than I have in my entire life. Actually, that's why. And now I'm going to test your hockey know-how, because I know that you've got, you and I have had many discussions about hockey in the past. So let's try your trivia knowledge here.
Okay.
My question to you is, Mike Carlson, is which of these three nations managed to produce an NHL player who went on to win the Stanley Cup? All right. Now we've seen, there's loads of nations that are involved in, playing we have loads of Europeans in the league. But which one of these three players produced a player that went on to win Stanley Cup? Is it A, Lithuania? Or is it B, South Korea? Or is it C, South Africa? So there's your ABC: Lithuania, South Korea, or South Africa. Which player?
Lithuania is not a hockey country. It's a
cogitate over it. Don't give me an answer now.
It's a basketball country. Okay, I'll think about it.
Yeah, exactly. We'll answer later on in the show. In the second intermission, you shall reveal how either smart you are or how idiotic you are. So let's move
Odds
on.
Are.
Let's move on. Game on. East Division. I know it's early yet, because we were roughly about 20 games into the season at the time of recording, and roughly about, let's say, there's another 36 games ish to go for a bunch of teams in these standings. But we're seeing, it's too early to tell, separate the men from the boys, separate the contenders from pretenders. But moving on to COVID protocol in the NHL. Now, this week, what's happened is that Sidney Crosby has allegedly tested positive. From what we told, he's following COVID protocol as they call the NHL. And we're, like I said, we're roughly about 20 games into this 56 game season, shortened season, and I think the NHL's been doing a pretty good job.
It's the first period.
Yeah, exactly. We're about third in, almost at the halfway point. And I think the NHL's been doing a good job as following protocol. I mean, we haven't had, Dallas Stars had a few issues in Texas that they've had to cancel a number of games, or postpone, I should say, because of COVID and following COVID protocol. And but all in all, I think from what we've seen, and baseball had to go last year, while the pandemic was in full and its infancy. But what do you think? NHL doing well with COVID compared to NFL, compared to NBA?
Well, NFL did remarkably well, I thought. There were a couple of hurdles along the way, and at times there were a couple of teams that were sort of roughly treated in terms of either the scheduling or having to lose players and still play a game. But in the end, they got a whole season played without a whole lot of disruption and without a lot of spreading of the disease, which to me was the more important factor. So, I think NHL they've got similar kind of problems, smaller rosters, which helps. But, whenever you see somebody is in the protocol, you ask the questions, does that mean they were exposed to someone who was COVID positive? Does it mean they've tested positive themselves? In which case, who were they exposed to? And that's the hardest part to control. The secondary part. You can do almost everything to keep players apart. And the biggest problem for NFL was not teams practicing; it was teams meeting, because, as you know, the players break down into groups and watch film every day, and have these small sessions. And when someone got positive, it then spread through the room first of all, which is what happened in Denver when all the quarterbacks tested positive because the three of them were in a room
Right.
and couldn't avoid it. So, I think a lot of things in the NHL have changed a bit as a result, and you don't see so many morning skates or anything like that to keep the guys apart as much as possible. But, again, it's almost like the first one without knowing what Sidney Crosby, what his exposure is. It's hard to judge,
Yeah.
but it doesn't sound like he's exposed his fellow players at the moment. And so from the NHL's point of view, that's great.
You can't even call it the new norm anymore. It's the norm or the old
Yeah,
norm. And
it is. Yeah.
it's we'll see what happens. But moving on to, the Buffalo Sabres, people are still trolling me, messaging me, chastising me. Now, I want to reiterate this. I didn't say that the Buffalo Sabres were going to go all the way and win the cup and lift it up in the city of Buffalo. I said they're going to be a dark horse, a pleasant surprise. Now, yes, they have been surprisingly bad. When you see Taylor Hall, who's supposed to have been like an amazing addition to their squad, scoring only one goal as at the time of recording in 19 games, that's not your golden child, your messiah that's going to help you, the city of Buffalo. But yeah, enough about Buffalo. I'll readdress. I'm still going to stick to my guns about Buffalo. Do they fire Ralph Krueger? Will Ralph Krueger be the second firing of the season? We'll talk about that later on. Now, the Central Division, Chicago has been a pleasant surprise, actually. I should have picked Chicago, and I would look like a genius compared to Buffalo. But they're on the up and up in the Central. But those Columbus Blue Jackets, they're still going through a soap opera. John Tortorella, one of the few hothead head coaches left in the league. He's had to go through a vote of no confidence with the GM lately, and it's actually been a fun story to follow. Who would have thought that it's been fun to follow the Columbus Blue Jackets? And here's the thing, because Tortorella, it's his last year's contract, and I guess they're thinking money. They don't want to fire him now. Wait until the end of the contract, then fire him, so they don't have to pay him off, kind of thing. And that's the thing. I guess you can say he's the Mourinho of of the NHL.
Tortorella.
I don't know, like I said, a bit of a hothead, a bit of a difficult guy to talk to, but
yeah,
that's it. Well, that's the end of the first period. First intermission. Now let's talk old time hockey. Old time hockey versus modern hockey. Today's hockey. It's people say it's like it was better in the old days. We're saying, oh, it's much better now with finesse and European influence. And hey, listen, it's a different era. Just to break it down for everybody, in general, I'm not going to go into the to too much detail here, but when the NHL was first formed, some would come and go in that era, that early era, but roughly there were about 12 to 10 teams. And then once the Depression hit and once he got World War II, it got whittled down to 6, and the leagues decided, okay, let's keep it at 6. These are the 6 strongest teams left in the league, and that's why they call it the original 6. Which consisted of the Boston Bruins, Montreal Canadiens, New York Rangers, Chicago Blackhawks, Detroit Red Wings, and the Toronto Maple Leafs. So you had that original 6 all the way up from 1942 to 1967, where in 1967 this league decided, let's double the amount of teams, and we doubled it to 12 teams. Then in the 80s, more expansion happened, and you got the Edmonton Oilers in, et cetera, and we are up to 21 teams in the 80s, which some people say was the golden era of hockey, in my opinion. And I guess people say that in the era that you grew up in watching hockey. But I overlapped the 70s and 80s. Then now here we are with 31 teams in total. And by the way, I hate having an odd number of teams. That'll change next year with Seattle coming into the league. We'll make it even 32 so everyone can play on the same day if need be. But here we go. We're now at 31 teams, approaching 32 teams next season. Is hockey better now than it used to be, Mike, for old fogies like us?
In some ways, yes. And oddly enough, I think the mid 70s was more of a peak than when I was first watching in the 60s. If you go back and watch games now and you watch the tape, you see it was a different game, and a lot of it was down to equipment. I think has changed hockey a lot. Goalie masks being the first one, the advent of helmets being another one, the curved stick being another one. But even more so, you mentioned, I think, foreign players, non-Canadian players. I mean, and in those days, in the 60s, Americans barely got a look in too. There was Tom Williams, I think, from Boston, was the only American in the NHL for about 10 years. The belief was kind of like the English in football up, in the 50s, and for most English people still now, that they are the best in the world and no one can compete with them, even though the world keeps proving them wrong and has done for the last 70 years. But that was the way Canada felt in up until 72 and a little bit beyond when they played the Russians. And you could argue very easily before that the 6 teams in the NHL were basically the 100 best players in the world. Then you had to kind of allow that the Russians had quite a few really good players on those early 70s teams, and the equipment obviously makes a huge difference, and the advent of foreign players does. But I think what you've got right now is a game where, especially in North America, the speed and the advanced tactical analysis of the game has outstripped the size of the rink itself. In the old days, Canadians were the bullies of hockey, obviously, and would start fights. In international hockey, that was frowned on. The Russians were almost every bit as dirty. In fact, they were dirtier in a sense because they didn't drop the gloves and fight. They would whack away at you. But on the bigger ice surfaces in Europe at the time, the difference was so outstanding that you could, it was really obvious if you were lunging after a guy trying to get to him. And the skating difference was amazing at that time too, because they were better skaters. And I've always argued in most sports, it's easier to play fast and slow down than it is to play slow and speed up. So when you had to skate better on the wider surfaces of international hockey, it was a problem for the Canadians, and secondarily for the Americans, for a long time. When you look at the 1980 Miracle on Ice at the Olympics, that U.S. team left a few of their more skilled players behind in favor of guys who could skate more. And that became kind of like the template for playing international hockey for a long while.
People say, the original 6, you can't really, count those cups of teams who won the original 6. I said, wait, hang on. Back in those days, those were the 6. Those 6 teams had the best players, not just in the continent, but pretty much almost the world, right? Because it was the toughest league to play in. So old-time hockey versus modern hockey, the jury's still out. Second period, we are now going to talk. We're going to continue this about old-time hockey versus modern. We're going to because Mike alerted me to an article that former legend, I should say former legend because he's still a legend, former Montreal Canadiens hockey goalie who is a legend, Ken Dryden, wrote an article recently, and he's not happy about goalies nowadays. He's having a go at goalies.
His argument is largely equipment based, in that the modern goaltender goes out with so much padding, with pads that are so oversized, as opposed to the days when Kenny played, that he can basically cover most of the net without hardly moving, without having to do some of the things that goalies had to do. And Ken was saying that, in the end, he thinks that they should make the goals bigger. because he thinks it's hard to the argument against making padding smaller is that it's protective. And therefore you run into this, you're going to expose them to more injury or something like that. So you can't reduce the padding that the guys are wearing. But I mean, it's not just true of goalies. Everybody has got far more padding, than they did in the days of the original six or whatever. And I think it's a very good point. It goes along with that idea of maybe the rinks need to be at least the international size, all over North America, because the players and their equipment have outgrown the game.
It's true. Some people can argue as well that goalies back in that day, and even in the 70s, they were more nimble because there was less equipment. So you would have to be more athletic with less padding because you could have been because it's less cumbersome. Now you just have to stand there, take the shots like a wall, and every now and then do a leaping catch that you might miss because your pads and your glove is triple the size of what it used to be in the original six era kind of thing. So
Patrick Waugh was very much in the Dryden school, as well.
But he was the overlap. He was old school. If you look at an old Patrick Waugh photo in his rookie season, yeah, he's got like Dryden-esque equipment that's sort of almost hugs his leg. And then look towards the end of his career. I think at one point in his career, he was even he was questioned about the size of his pads when he was at Colorado, that it's chalk and cheese the way he used to be from his rookie season to his final season, how big he was pretty much the transition period. When you think about as well, penalty shootouts in hockey and soccer football, it's the favorite's always in football and for the shooter. And in hockey, the favorite's always in for the goalie. It's interesting to see, and whether obviously pads can't get any bigger than they already are now, and but that's but whether they widen the nets, I'm against. But Dryden does have a point. Intermission again. Here we are now. Again, this was where we do pop culture going to hockey, or is a hockey overlapping into pop culture? We all love our pop culture and how it influences people getting to the game or getting into other branches of literature or cinema or television. But here's where we're going to go with. Well, it's apropos that this week's hockey book of the week should be Ken Dryden, The Game. It should be a book that should be on everyone's hockey bookshelf. Ironically, mine's not on my bookshelf because I can't find it. It's in a box full of hockey books somewhere else. I can't remember if it's here in my attic in London or to my parents' condo in Montreal in a basement or something in a storage locker. But yes, it is a must read. I haven't read it since it first got released back in the 90s. But Ken Dryden's The Game is one of those books that, it's a must read. It shows how much hockey does impact a community, a hockey community, a village, a small town, a city, how it has a global outreach. And obviously, Mike, you've an avid reader and an avid fan of this book as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would go so far as to saying, it is the best hockey book I've ever read. I think it's one of the top 10 sports books that I've ever read. And it's everything that you just said. And it goes up to the country level. I mean, the national obsession of Canada.
Despite the fact that Ken Dryden was also in the head office at the Toronto Maple Leafs for a brief spell, I'll still recommend the book. So Ken Dryden's The Game, buy it. Put on your bookshelf. Now we're going on to cinema now. Now, before I was going to do the mystery of the $1 million hockey puck, but then I figured I'll save it for later because Mike reminded me. He just before we went on air, hey, why don't we do The Deadliest Season with Meryl Streep and Michael Moriarty? I said, oh my God, I completely forgot about that film until Mike reminded me. And thank you, Mike, because it is one of those films that people don't know much about it, but should see.
Yeah, well, I had an ulterior motive since I've never seen the $1 million hockey puck, so this way I could talk about something I knew about. But yeah, a lot of people haven't seen it because it was a made-for-TV movie in the late 70s. But Michael Moriarty plays a defenseman who's told he has to play rougher, tougher to survive. And he doesn't want to goon it up, but eventually he does. And he hooks a guy, gets him in the kidney, if I remember right, and the guy dies. Maybe it's the spleen, but but he dies from internal injuries, and he winds up being in court over this. And his wife is played by Meryl Streep, who I'm convinced took the role only so she could do a Canadian accent. My theory on Meryl Streep is that all of her roles are chosen so that she can do different accents and display her prowess at the time. But yeah, worth searching out, and probably better than the $1 Million Hockey Puck.
Oh, big time. The Mystery $1 Million Hockey Puck. We'll talk about that another day. One of those it's so bad it's good kind of films. But yes, we're gonna move on to trivia and see if your frontal lobe has fermented an answer.
Well,
let me reiterate the question.
Okay, do the
for
question.
Our viewers and listeners. I asked you which of these three nations managed to develop, import, or give the NHL a player that went on to win the Stanley Cup. Was it A, Lithuania? Was it B, South Korea? Was it C, South Africa? What is your educated wild guess?
Well, my educated guess would be Korea, because they actually have hockey there at a reasonable level. You don't in Lithuania particularly, and you don't in South Africa, although there's nothing to stop a player who was born in one of those countries playing somewhere else. Like a Lithuanian could go play in Latvia, quite easily. So, but Korea is going to be my way out guess.
South Korea is your guess. Well, in no particular order, let me just go over each country with you and see if you're right or wrong. Because in South Africa, born in Johannesburg was Olaf Kolzig, Oli the goalie, who was born to German parents, went on to play in the NHL, many games with the Washington Capitals, yet never won a cup. Went on to play with Germany as well because he had German parents. But Lithuania gave us Danis Zubris, who went on to play with Montreal and various other teams. But Lithuanian born and raised Danis Zubris never won a cup. So yes, the answer is South Korea, which gave us Jim Pack, who went on to win 2 Stanley Cups with the Pittsburgh Penguins, and who is now currently coaching the South Korean Olympic team and national team, and coached them in 2018, and most likely will coach him next year's Winter Olympics. Also, by the way, as a little side note, Jim Pack not only did he win Stanley Cups with Pittsburgh, and he actually played for the Nottingham Panthers here in the United Kingdom for 2 seasons. You want to say how the mighty have fallen after winning 2 Stanley Cups, but hey, he's at the twilight of his career. You thought, why not? I'll go to the English League and play 2 seasons with the Nottingham Panthers. So there you go. Jim Pack of the South Korea is the answer.
I'm impressed with myself.
Third period. Here's where we go north. We go north and we talk. Let's delve a little deeper into the Claude Julien firing. Montreal has got rid of we mentioned this before. They got rid of their coach, Claude Julien, and assistant coach Kirk Muller. Now Dominique Ducharme and assistant coach Alex Burrows. They finally got their first win against Ottawa, which is, you shouldn't be rejoicing or jumping in jubilation for beating Ottawa 3-1. But is it, good things to come, or what's happening in Montreal, Mike?
I've never been a big Claude Julien fan because I think he's kind of old school, real old school. And I agree that's not probably the NHL. You think about his Bruin teams, when they were successful primarily by out hustling and out muscling teams, not by anything tactical that was, astounding coaching in that sense. So it might be more motivational, and maybe he isn't getting that thing.
The standings in the East, well, obviously the Leafs are doing well. They shut out the Edmonton Oilers and Connor McDavid back-to-back games. They look like the real deal. Again, it's too early to tell, but they've been doing this without Austin Matthews at the moment, who's got a wrist injury. But let's face it, this league is considered potentially the weakest in the league. We don't know until the playoffs when they start playing other teams from other leagues, but that's about 36 games away from now. The West, the everyone's still in it. The Ducks still sucks. I'm not going to talk about the San Jose Sharks, who also picked as a potentially um, dark horse. Again, I said dark horse, not to go all the way, just like they would surprise everybody. Okay, just leave me alone. Stop trolling me about that.
You're the kiss of death, man.
I know, but however, here's interesting about San Jose Sharks. Patrick Marleau, who's in his 40s now, who's graying and everything. The San Jose Sharks wore a retro throwback jersey that was the same jersey he wore in his rookie season. So he's actually wearing the same throwback old school jersey that he wore way back when he first started with the San Jose Sharks. So that's how old that guy is. Now, Vegas, we're going to talk about here in more detail. Now, Mike's going to back me up here because we give his little NFL insight. There was a time where none of the four big major leagues in North America would even touch the Las Vegas with a barge pole because we can't. I remember there was talk about the NHL having an All-Star game there years and years and years ago, and then we can't do that. No, the players will go out and they go gambling, and then there would be risk of corruption with you can't associate gambling with hockey, and there's no way the franchise could ever go there. Now here we are. There's a franchise there. The NFL Raiders, Vegas Raiders now are now a Vegas franchise. So here we are going from no teams being in Vegas because you can't associate gambling and betting with our sport to now two major teams in the same city. Now, one other thing as well that's caused concern this week. The Vegas Golden Knights, they dropped their partnership sponsorship with I forget what's called, a pick trading group for betting. I'm no expert in gambling or betting, so excuse me if I'm not getting this vocabulary right. But yeah, so it's a pick trading company that does bets for bettors, for gambling companies, and they had a partnership with Vegas. And then Vegas overnight they have to drop them. They have to drop their partnership because there was concern that this pick trading company, whatever they're called, was getting inside information. We're too involved with the team that they were able to get access to injury reports and lineup formations before anyone else could, before even NHL teams could, or even the media could, because they're so deeply involved with the team that it almost was almost like, if you will, in the stock market, insider trading, which is technically illegal, Mike.
I think there's a couple of things going on. One is gambling has become so important to sports in terms of not just sponsorship, but content. As everybody's online with content, they know that their people are following them, particularly because lots of them want to gamble on the games. So they want to keep them involved. In this country, you've got betting sites as shirt advertising, and there are betting companies within the grounds at some grounds. Yeah, in the United Kingdom, in the Football League. So I think there's a reality that gambling is a big time thing, and you can't really bury your head in the sand and believe that if you stay out of Las Vegas, you're staying out of gambling. Which the NFL obviously gave in to that point of view, because Vegas is a big and growing city. But you can't avoid the idea that Vegas is a city built on gambling. It is a company town for gambling, and for the NFL, which offers kind of the widest variety of gambling. I think that's is always going to be a kind of tender spot. For the NHL, a little bit less. And I think for basketball, probably the most, because basketball is the sport that obviously has had point fixing scandals going back 70 years, because it's relatively easy to say win but by less than the spread in basketball, which is more difficult in football, more difficult in hockey, unless or soccer, unless you've got the goalie in your under
Yeah,
your
so
belt.
it's harder to fix hockey, I say. Yeah.
Yeah. But the bottom line on this is, if you are in partnership with a gambling firm, then the concerns you raised are legitimate ones. And I think when you go into partnership with the gamblers, then you've crossed the line. It's okay if you wear the advertising, or you run commercials for them to bet on the games or something like that. But when you're in partnership, it raises far too many questions. But it's much less of a, as I said, in the atmosphere today, it's much less of a shock than it would have been 10 years ago, say. I mean, I think it was no, it was football, who wouldn't let some active players go to Vegas for one of those fan conventions where you sign autographs for money and stuff like that, because they wouldn't even let them go into the casino to do that.
That's right.
And that was only 10 or 15 years ago.
That's the end of our show. That's the end of the game. That's the end of everything. So basically, thank you very much, Mike Carlson. For joining us this week with your excellence. I'm sure we haven't seen the last of you yet. There's still plenty of hockey to play, plenty of regular season hockey, plenty of playoff hockey. It's like June will be here before we know it, though, and hopefully the pandemic is
That's true.
easier to deal with. Hopefully there'll be fans.
Yeah.
I mean, there's already fans in some stadiums now, but we'll see what happens. Now, don't forget to follow us. We're on Instagram. We're on Twitter. We're on Facebook. We're on loads of other platforms. I'm a social media guy now, apparently. At Slapshot Talk. That is our Twitter handle, at Slapshot Talk. Again, Insta, Twitter, Facebook. Find us. Slapshot Smack Talk is the name of the show.
Uh-huh.
Google, YouTube channel, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you can get me at Carlson Sports is my Twitter feed. I do a Patreon column, Patreon /Mike Carlson FMTE. And you can find me on Medium, where I'm writing about stuff that's usually not about sports, but it can be fairly interesting reads as well. So, trying to keep busy. Yeah. And there's still I've still got plenty of time hockey to talk about.
Great stuff. Thanks, Mike, for joining us. And thank you, everybody out there, for joining us on Slapshot Smack Talk. See you next week. Keep your stick on the ice.